The Korean War brought further transformation. International trade embargoes against China obliged Hong Kong to replace re-exports from China with its own locally made goods in order to maintain its trading levels. Local manufacturing took off so rapidly that overall trade actually increased. By 1959, 70% of Hong Kong's exports were locally produced, compared with only 30% in 1953. Hong Kong's success in textiles brought it under import quotas in other countries, so local industrialists diversified into garments, plastics and electronics to open new export markets. By 1961, 42% of Hong Kong's working population was employed in manufacturing.
到60年代中咧，就開始已經係即係嗰啲勞動力開始係緊張啦。咁已經有啲好似塑膠花都要發到啦，就係嗰啲即係有啲家庭嗰個婦女去做啊。另外咧就新界離島啦，就有好多人都去開嗰啲所謂山寨廠去吸收嗰啲工人。
Women used to take huge bundles of plastic flowers, pieces to their houses and assemble the flowers at home. A lot of cottage industries that would get their materials from the factories.
The quality of Hong Kong products improved, raising the value of exports, with the result that Hong Kong benefited in the long term from the foreign import restrictions. Hong Kong manufacturers also began looking toward more sophisticated high-tech products to expand their markets and international competitive edge.
因為香港太集中於紡織啦，所以製衣啊咪有好多人覺得都要大約就分散啲啦，所以佢哋揀呢個定製工業。
Local businesses followed the lead of the Shanghainese immigrants and began approaching banks for funds to develop their enterprises. Financing for industrial development and international trade helped develop Hong Kong into a truly international financial centre. Gradually, more Hong Kong workers moved into the service and finance sectors, further reducing the territory's dependence on export-driven manufacturing. Portions of Kowloon and the new territories that had previously been only sparsely populated, such as Tsuen Wan and Kwun Tong, took on new importance as sites for industrial expansion. Hong Kong's population did not lack jobs, but having a job did not guarantee a decent standard of living. Wages were low, and urban Hong Kong and Kowloon, where most of the jobs were, had a severe shortage of low-cost housing. Apart from cramped, often squalid tenements, most of the housing developed privately was too expensive for the average industrial worker. The 1961 census found that only 21% of Hong Kong's households lived in self-contained flats. For many, the only option was a home in one of the vast squatter areas that covered the hillsides of Hong Kong and Kowloon. Squatter areas caused a lot of problems in terms of sanitation, safety and public order. Before the war, some government officials had called for the establishment of publicly subsidised, low-cost housing. But the idea was unpopular with many community leaders who objected to the cost. The disastrous fire in the Shek Kip Mei squatter area in 1953 provided the government with an excuse to embark immediately on a public housing programme. Resettlement estates multiplied in many urban districts. Their conditions were basic. In a typical Mark I estate, 30 households shared washing and bathing facilities, and communal toilets served a full floor of 60 households. An average-sized 120 square foot room housed 2 parents, a grandparent, and 4 small children. But the low rent of $14 a month made public housing very desirable for many poor families. A rise in juvenile crime, blamed on crowded and oppressive conditions in the resettlement estates, provided some impetus for improvement. Later models of estates gradually improved to larger, self-contained units. But the government had difficulty keeping up with the demand for cheap housing. In 1964, 1 out of 5 Hong Kong people lived as squatters, nearly double the number 10 years before. It was under this extreme pressure for low-cost housing that urban planning began to take on new importance, as the government tried to make the best possible use of scarce urban land. New industrial land was also needed, with existing industrial districts already saturated by the territory's burgeoning manufacturing enterprises. The district of Kwun Tong is an example of Hong Kong's first attempts at systematic and comprehensive town planning. In its early development, Kwun Tong was hailed as a radical new departure in Hong Kong public life. Kwun Tong had been an important political centre early in Hong Kong's pre-colonial history. But by the first half of this century, it had been reduced to a refuse dump and oil depot. For all its superficial unpleasantness, Kwun Tong provided a perfect site for a community to be built from scratch. Its existing population of 1,000 squatters could be easily resettled, and its eroded hillsides provided sites for terraced housing and landfill to reclaim the shallow Kowloon Bay. Kwun Tong also benefited from relatively good access to both urban Kowloon and Hong Kong Island by land and water. The government set aside $10 million and began full-scale development work in Kwun Tong in 1954. By 1967, the district was complete in all its essentials as we know it today. But as Hong Kong's first full-scale experiment in town planning, Kwun Tong exposed a number of planning errors and taught lessons for future development of the territory's newer urban districts. Originally planned for 120,000 residents, Kwun Tong had a population of nearly 500,000 by 1971. On the other hand, industrialists were slow to move into the district because of inadequate infrastructure in its early development. Attempts to tightly control zoning provided too little area for the commercial centre, which soon sprawled into the zoned residential areas. Little space was set aside for parks or sitting-out areas, creating a concrete jungle unrelieved by green. Separation of the industrial and residential areas by major roadways caused severe pedestrian and traffic congestion at rush hours. The restrictive zoning also removed the incentive to provide a healthier environment in the industrial area, which up to the present remains badly polluted and uninviting in appearance. All the same, Kwun Tong represents a remarkable achievement in building up a town on an empty site in half a generation. And the lessons learned there are being applied with greater success in newly created urban areas throughout the territory.
由於當其